Hi, this is a tutorial series to teach you how to make your first game in Gamemaker in 3 simple steps. The goal is to introduce you to the Gamemaker software and its most basic functions so that after you finish these 3 steps, you can learn to make your own games, troubleshoot bugs, and find solutions all on your own. My name is Dr. Sky, and I'm a professor of digital media arts at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. This is step 1. You will learn a basic familiarity with how Gamemaker works, how to implement some basic game mechanics, and how to add simple graphics to your game. Let's start by opening Gamemaker. Let me switch over the screen. There we are. Open Gamemaker, create an account, log in, do all of that beforehand, and also pay attention specifically to this little series of numbers in the upper right hand corner. You want to make sure the version of the software, what's called the IDE, the version is the most up-to-date version. I'm working on version 2022.5. And also this runtime should also be up to date. Now, Gamemaker will prompt you if these aren't up to date, and you might need to troubleshoot that, but this isn't going to work unless things are up to date, and both of these are working together. The runtime is what allows you to test run your games. You should see this after you open Gamemaker. So let's start a new project. If you see me looking over here, because over here is where I have my notes. So click New. You're not going to mess with any of the templates. You're just going to click New Blank. You're not going to worry about anything over here. You're just going to put in a project name. For here, let's just say I'm going to call this First Game Tutorial. First Game Tutorial dash, I'm going to call it, add a year because I update these tutorials. Now, the location. You can choose where your project, which is a folder with a bunch of files in it, is saved on your computer. This is important, especially if you're working on various computers and you want to access your project. One thing you can do is you can export your project into a single file that is sort of compressed, which compresses all the files together that you can unarchive on a different machine. I like to be able to access these files and know where they are, so I see the location, I know where that is, but if you're working on, say, a university computer, I recommend that you save this to a folder that you can access and you know how to access, like the desktop. So after you do that, click Let's Go, and it will create your new project. This is the workspace of Gamemaker. This big open field is where you're going to be putting things, and imagine this like a desktop where you can put different papers and folders and things. It's open wide so that when you open things, you'll see it and work with it in this workspace. To the right is the asset browser. These are all the things that go into your game, like rooms, which are like levels, or objects, which are the things that you move around and interact with in a game, or sprites, which are the things that you see in a game. The first thing you're going to familiarize yourself with, are rooms. So I'm going to click this little arrow over here to open up all the rooms in this folder. Nothing else is in any of these folders, so you can't expand them, but over here you can expand this clicking that little arrow. And the new game project automatically starts with a new room. Now, rooms in Gamemaker are like levels or areas, and they're what you see in the game. They're what house your game. So room 1 is the room that it gives us. We're going to rename this to something that's, I don't know, according to your naming convention. I like to choose a certain naming convention and stick with it. It's important in digital media arts to follow certain naming conventions to keep things clean and organized. I'm going to rename this room 1 to something else. Now you can right click, and I recommend that you use a mouse when working with Gamemaker Studio, not a laptop trackpad. You can go to rename and click that to rename it. Also, a handy shortcut if you have a row of function keys on your keyboard is the function key F2. When anything is highlighted, you can rename it. So I'm going to hit F2 and rename it. It highlights that. So I'm going to call this one R underscore, I don't know, let's call it game. R underscore game. R for room underscore, and then this is just going to be our game. in this one room. Now we're going to open this room by double clicking it, and we get a new workspace here. Now, the first thing you need to familiarize yourself with up here is these little tabs in the upper left-hand corner. If you click this tab called Workspace 1, it takes you back to this workspace view. And if you click R_game, it takes you to the room view. Now, you can close these tabs. I can close the room editor screen. It gets me back here. Also, you can even close the workspace tab and just get here, but you can't close any last tab. You can click this little plus symbol to open a new workspace. So here's my workspace. I'm going to open the room editor. This is the room editor. The first thing you need to do is get used to this space. You can zoom in and out using these buttons up here. I can zoom out and I can zoom in. I can also hold the control key and then use my mouse's scroll wheel to zoom in and out. And if I'm anywhere, or say I'm like over here and I can't see my room anymore, there's this handy little button over here called Center Fit. If I click that, it fits your room back into the center of the screen and zooms in appropriately. Over here, you have a bunch of different sections of the room editor, but we're going to ignore those for now. And the first thing we're going to look at is properties, this little section called properties. And under properties, we're going to change the width and height of our room. For simplicity, let's just change the width to 600 and the height to 600. And here, again, I'm clicking and holding my scroll wheel in here so I can move things around. And again, I can hold control to zoom in and out. Now, no matter how far I zoom in or out on this room is 600 pixels by 600 pixels tall and wide. Now, see the layers section of the room editor? These layers are a way of managing what you see in the room and managing what things are in front of other things. Items placed in layers that are listed higher in the list appear in front of things that are underneath them in this. If you're familiar with, say, GIMP or Photoshop, this is very similar. With layers, you can turn layers on and off as well with this little eye symbol. Don't worry about what these are called right now, but we are going to look at the background layer, and we're going to change the color to something. So let's click background layer, and under here, under background properties, you see this color bar, and click the color bar, and I can change it to something else. Let's change it to like, I don't know, like a dark blue. There we go. Now, right now, we actually have a working game. There's nothing in it, but I want to show you how to run test builds of your game. You can take your mouse and go over here to this little play symbol over here. If you hover over it, it says run, but it also gives you a handy shortcut of F5. If you have a row of function keys on your keyboard, you can just hit F5 in Gamemaker, and it will create a test build of your game. And here's our little test build. This is really small because it's 600 pixels by 600 pixels. It's really small, but that's how I created the game. And that's okay. I'm also on a really big monitor right now. And you can just exit out of that. Be sure to exit out of this before you keep working on Gamemaker. You can see down here that I have this new little window that I can close. So I close that. Again, I hit F5, or you can just click this little play symbol and it will do the same thing. Here's our little test build of the game. Nothing's in it, just that blue background. You don't see the grid because this grid is here to help us place things in here. All right. It is important to check something here. Like I said, if you're having a hard time, if you click the run button and nothing is happening, you can check down here for the output to see if there's any issues that you need to fix. This will oftentimes alert you to bugs in your code, but also you should make sure that your version of the software as well as the runtime version are up to date, and you can look online on how to update those. Next, let's introduce sprites. Sprites are the things that you see in the game. They are little two-dimensional images. So let's make a sprite that we can put in our room. So let's highlight sprites here by clicking on it, and let's right-click on that and hit create. Now it's important that you don't click on something else, right-click and hit create, and then find sprite because if you do that, it will create a sprite in that folder, but we want to keep all the sprites in the sprites folder. We want to keep all the rooms in the rooms folder. Again, we want to keep things nice and clean. You can move things around in these folders easily enough, but for now, let's just make sure we always click the things that we want to create before we hit right click. So sprites, right click that, create, go down here, sprite. And here in our workspace, we get a little window to create a sprite, a thing that you can see in the game. And I'm going to rename the sprite s_block, S for sprite. And don't worry about everything that you see here, but we are going to change a few things. First, we're going to make sure that this little cross over here, I think you can probably see it on your own computer. You probably can't see it on my own screen. We want that in the middle, and we're going to get there, get it in the middle by going over here to the right-hand corner of this drop-down and clicking middle center. That automatically puts it in the center of the sprite. Now, this is the sprite's origin. This is where it draws the sprite in the room. So say you give the game instructions to put the sprite on the horizontal pixel number 10 and the vertical pixel number 10, it will draw that sprite where at that location where this little cross is. So if this cross is over here, your sprite will be right and below wherever you put its location. And if you put it over here, the sprite will be drawn above and to the left of whatever location that you put. Most of the time, I like things in the middle center because it just makes sense to me. Some things we're going to put in the top left, but I'll let you know when that's going to happen. So I click over here, middle center. Next, there we go. We need to click the Resize button. The Resize button is this little symbol over here. We're going to click that, and we're going to click Resize Canvas, and then we are going to change this from 64 to 64 to 40 and 40. Click Apply. That changes the size of the sprite, but don't worry about the sprite's origin. If you have middle center selected, it will always make sure that its origin will be placed in the middle center, regardless of how you resize the sprite. We're going to click the Edit Image button now, and we're going to create a little basic image. Oftentimes when you're prototyping games, instead of creating the art and importing it, you just like to get a quick and dirty prototype up. We just fill in colored squares. So I'm going to click the Fill tool over here, and I'm going to choose a color for it. Let's just choose yellow. Close that. And now we have a little sprite, a little yellow square. I'm going to close out of this sprite editor. You can leave this up, and as you open up other things, they'll automatically appear above and below, and you can scroll up and down. You can also hold the scroll wheel and move it around and zoom out and in. But I like to close things when I'm done working on them so my workspace view stays clean. It's important to manage your assets in your asset editors. Next, we need to familiarize you with objects. Now, sprites are the things you see in a game, but they're just the graphics. We need to assign those graphics to objects, things, actual things in the game. So over here to objects, you can right-click, click Create, or hover over Create and find Object, which is right there, and click Object. And let's give it a name. I'm going to call it O_block. So now we have a sprite called S_block, and we have an object called O_block, O for object, S for sprite. And this is the thing that we're actually going to put in our game. And we need to assign that sprite to this object. And you can assign the same sprite to a bunch of different objects. This sprite is now something you can access whenever you need to use it. So to assign the sprite to this object, we're going to go over here where it says no sprite. We're going to click that. We're going to click sprites. We're going to find our little yellow block and click that. And now our sprite is assigned to this object. And we're going to close out of that for now. Open our room editor for our game, double click on that. And then I'm going to make sure that the instances layer is highlighted under layers instead of the background. I'm going to make sure that's highlighted, which it automatically is. It's important to pay attention where you're putting things and which layer in your rooms. And a simple way to add that newly created object, not the sprite, but the object O_block into the room is simply click and drag it in. And you can move it around. Now it'll automatically snap to these different grid points to where the grid lines intersect. There. And we're going to we can change the size of the grid over here. You can toggle the grid on or off. You can turn that off so that it sort of just free flows. Turn the grid on, and if you click this little down arrow, you can change the size of the grid. Now this object is 40 by 40. I'm going to change the grid size to 20 by 20. And this allows me a little bit more control over where I put this block. And let's actually add a few of these to the room. I'm gonna again just click and drag it over. And a handy feature that you should learn at some point is if you have an object highlighted, you can hold down the Alt or the Option key on your keyboard, and now you can paint using that object. You can also hold Shift and click and drag to select a bunch of different instances of an object to move them, or you can hit the Delete key and delete them. So now that we have these in the game, whenever we do anything in the game, anytime we update anything, we always do a test run of the game to make sure that we haven't introduced any bugs. So I'm going to click the Run button. There it is, our little 600 by 600 square game with those little objects in the game. Now those objects aren't doing anything. Let's make sure that they can do some things. Now I placed them at the bottom of the room for a reason. I would recommend that you place your objects near the bottom of the room because we're going to make them rise up. So go to O block, open that up, and we're going to learn about events. So you see your object information right here, but next to it is a little window called events. Events are things that happen in the game, and this is where we place our code. So we're going to go to Add Event, and we are going to click Create. Now you should get a little prompt if you're using the most up-to-date version of Gamemaker if you want to use GML code or GML visual. Now GML visual is a way of making games just through drag and drop objects. You just drag and drop and rearrange things. And it's kind of a fun way to teach kids about the nature of programming and how to build a simple game. But I assume that you are all grown up, you're capable of handling some very simple code, so we're going to learn everything using just GML code. So GML code is highlighted. We're not selecting GML visual, we're choosing GML code, and I'm going to select Don't Ask Again for this project. If I was working on my personal Gamemaker projects, I would just click Don't Ask Again Ever because I never use GML visual. So I'm going to click Don't Ask Again for this project and click OK. And now under the create event, we get this little script editor. Now the create event, we put things in the create event that we want to have happen one time the moment that object comes into existence. So when we run our game, all of those little yellow blocks, they just popped into existence when we ran our game, and we want certain things to happen right when they begin to exist. So this is the create event. We can put some stuff in there. And it's a very useful tool because the code that we put in here only happens once. It's very powerful. I'm going to introduce you to the STEP event in a second that runs 60 times per second. Right now, we're going to learn about the create event. Now, I've made the text in the script editor very big so you can see it on my screen. I think I can make it even bigger if I can. There we go. I make it even bigger or smaller by hitting the F8 and F7 keys. So if the text in your script editor is too small, you can change the size. But I know I'm working on a big screen, and you're probably watching this on a smaller screen as a video, so I want to make sure that's nice and big. You can change the size right there. You'll notice these green words for description and write your code in this editor. I'm going to just delete that. Just know that if you put 2 forward slashes, everything after those 2 forward slashes is a comment, which will not be recognized as code. And so you can write descriptions here in green to help comment on your code. So these are comments. So it's 2 forward slashes and then you write whatever you want. And then a new line will be normal code. So we'll be doing that a lot to keep track of the things that we are writing. It's good practice to comment on your code. So what we're going to do here in the create event, I'm going to add 2 forward slashes and make a comment and write make the block go up. I'm going to make another comment here. Speed is a built-in, actually built-in is hyphenated, built-in variable of an object instance, which is why it turns green. Speed equals 2 semicolon. Now, when we wrote speed, it turned bright green. That's because an object's speed is a built-in variable. Every single object in your game has this built-in variable that you can alter or leave. If you don't write speed anywhere, it'll just assume that it's not being used, so it won't use it. But if you want to alter an object's speed, you can write speed and then give it a number. And this is how many pixels it would move every frame of your game. Now, most default projects in Gamemaker are built running 60 frames per second. You can verify that by going over here to game options in the upper left, little gear here. And you can see game frames per second. On mine, it's already at 60. So I'm going to click OK to close that and scroll back up here. I'm going to write some more comments. Direction is also a built-in variable of instances. Now I write instances because in this object right here, objects technically only exist as one object. This object over here in my asset editor is an object, and everything that I put in the game room, these are instances of that one object. So these are all the same objects, so they are one object, and these, since there's 4 of them, they are 4 instances of that object. So when I say instance, that's what I mean. Direction is a built-in variable of instances. 0 to 359 is degrees for the direction. That's 360 total, but oftentimes in code, we start counting at 0. 0 is right, 90 is up, 180 is left, and 270 is down, and then everything in between goes the other directions. And I will write direction equals 90. The semicolon after these lines of code is very important. It tells the game the instructions for that line have ended. So it's important always to remember semicolons. Messing up with semicolons can introduce bugs, so watch out for that. And sometimes we add semicolons where they don't belong, and then that can also add bugs. So we've already clicked the game settings to verify that our game is running at 60 frames per second. So now we just test the game. We have added code to our game, so we always run the game to make sure that we've done it correctly. Now, if we've done it correctly, we will see our blocks are moving up 2 pixels every frame of the game. And it's working. I'll run it again so you can see it. Look, our game is doing things now. Okay, so here in the create event, this is one way of doing things, but an important lesson to learn is that there's always a lot of different ways to do the exact same thing in Gamemaker and other systems. And oftentimes those other ways are better. So this is a lot of code and a lot of comments. Let's first delete all the comments. We don't need the comments. You know what speed and direction is. That's pretty self-explanatory. But also, we don't need 2 lines of code to do this. We actually only need 1 line of code. And for that, we're going to delete everything in the create event. And we're going to add a different type of event, called a step event. So I'm going to click add event and go to hover over step. And then I'm going to click on step. Instead of begin or end, I'll click just plain step. And this opens up another tab. And you can switch between these 2 different tabs here. You could also double click on these over here to switch between them. Delete that. And a step event is something that happens every step of the game or every frame of the game. So our game is running at 60 frames per second. So all the code that we add to this box here will run or take place or happen 60 times every second. So it's important that we're aware of that when we're adding code here, because that changes how things run. So in here, let's add a comment for what we're about to write. The comment is move up 2 pixels every frame. And our line of code is y equals y minus 2. Now, if you're familiar with like basic math, you know that y refers to the horizontal position of a point. X refers to the, y refers to the vertical position of a point. X refers to the horizontal position. So in our game room, Here horizontally, we have starting at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It goes all the way up to 600. And in GameMaker, the Y position or horizontal position starts on the top. So up here where my mouse is, that is 0, the Y position 0, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And it goes all the way to 600, all the way down here at the bottom. So horizontally, 0 for X starts here and counts up, and 0 for Y starts here and goes down. And you actually can see down here the X and Y coordinates of wherever your mouse is in the room. So you can actually see where things are in the room. So pay attention to that number. If I put my mouse here, it goes to very low numbers. And as I go over here, they both become very high numbers. So Y equals Y minus 2. Now this is telling the game, every frame of the game, say, hey, check where my Y position is. Say my Y position or vertical position is 500, which is very low in the room. Okay, check where that is, 500. Now take 2 away from that, so now it's 498, and take 498 and make that my new Y position. This little equal sign is telling the game, hey, assign that new number to my Y position. And that changes, and that runs every frame of the game 60 times per second, and so that's why when we click run, the exact same thing happens as our previous lines of code. It moves up 2 pixels every frame. So be sure to run the game, and we run the game often to make sure we're not mistyping everything. And remember that I have the semicolon appropriately placed there. All right. Now, there is actually a better way to write this one line of code, and this is how we're going to be writing things in the future, so it's important to get used to it. Instead of writing Y equals Y minus 2, which is not very elegant, it's not a very pretty way of writing things, we can write Y minus equals 2, semicolon. And this little operator here, minus equals, is a way of saying, hey, do the exact same thing as before. Check my Y position, subtract 2 from my Y position and make that my new Y position, minus equals. And you can do the same thing with, say, plus equals 2. So this will move something 2 pixels every frame to the right. Minus equals will, over here with X, will move it 2 pixels to the left. There's also operators like multiply equals and divide equals, but we're not going to worry about that right now. Similarly, you could do Y plus equals negative 2. All of those do the exact same thing. So I'm going to change this back to Y minus equals 2. Run the game. We've changed things, so we always got to check to see if it works. It does indeed work. Next, let's learn about variables, because we don't like to hard code numbers into our step event. We like to make sure that we can manipulate these numbers at a centralized place. And so we're not hunting through our hundreds of lines of code to look for that one number that dictates the speed of how fast things move. So let's make it a variable. Let's go to this blocks create event and create a variable, or we say declare a variable. It's important to let GameMaker know that a variable needs to be made before we do anything with that variable. So a variable is simply a name given to a thing that we can manipulate. So it can be a name for a number, as in this case. So we're going to write a variable and call it SPD, meaning speed, equals 2. SPD equals 2. Now note, we're not writing speed with the 2 E's, because that is a built-in variable in these instances or in this object, and we don't want to mess with that. So we have to choose a different word for it. So SPD makes sense to me. You can also call it something silly like, how fast should I move? Equals 2. And that could be a variable. For simplicity, SPD seems fine to me. Equals 2, semicolon. You'll notice a little caution sign here saying like, hey, the variable SPD is only referenced once. You're not doing anything with this variable. Are you sure you want it there? So let's change that. Let's go to the step event and change this to and replace it with SPD. So this is saying the exact same thing. When GameMaker in this O block sees SPD, it knows it means the number 2. So let's hit run, make sure that it's running. Beautiful, it is indeed. All right, there are different types of variables. This is an integer variable. There's different types of variables like booleans and strings, which just means text, or real numbers. We're we'll get to those when we get to them in this tutorial series. So now if we want to change how fast it moves, we can just change this number over here. Instead of messing with our code, we go to the create event and we can say, hey, we want it to move super fast. Let's change that to 5 pixels per. Oof, now they're going really fast. Or we want to make it super slow. Let's change it to 0.1. Oh, they're barely moving. Oh, they're just inching up. Oh, so slow now. There we go. Change this back to 2. All right, some more things. Let's make it so these objects disappear when your mouse touches them. Let's actually start implementing some game mechanics. Let's make this an actual game. In the step event, over here, go down a little bit, write a new comment, disappear when mouse touches it. And you're going to learn about your first conditional statement. And this is going to be an if statement, an if conditional statement. If parentheses, distance underscore to underscore point, another open parentheses, mouse underscore x, comma, mouse underscore y, close parentheses, less than or equal to, less than equals 0, close parentheses. So that is our first conditional. And let me explain what this is doing. So when we write if, it's saying, hey, if this statement within these 2 parentheses is found to be true, do something. So what is it asking here? Distance to point is a function built into Gamemaker that checks the distance between 2 different things. So in this case, distance to point means, hey, check the distance of whatever is here to where this instance of the object is. So we're checking to see how far away the mouse cursor position is in the game. Mouse X is a built-in variable that the game can check where the mouse is in the game. Mouse X, mouse Y, vertical position of the mouse cursor in the room. And if the distance between the mouse to the block is less than or equal to 0, meaning is the mouse hovering over the block at any point, open curly bracket, I'm going to go down a few, close curly bracket, do the things within these curly brackets. So just to clarify, when I'm open the game, if my mouse is over here, the game could say, oh, when it's checking how far away it is from this block right here, oh, the mouse is, 100 away, or the mouse is, 50 away. But when my mouse is over it, it says, oh, it is less than or equal to 0 distance away. So let's do some code. The code is this. I'm going to indent in, because that is good practice. Instance underscore destroy, open and close parentheses, semicolon to end our line of code. Don't add a semicolon here. You don't add semicolons after conditionals. You do add semicolons after lines that are instructions. Quick note here, some people who write code like to make their curly brackets appear after the conditional, immediately after the conditional, at least the open curly bracket. That's what I do when I'm making my own games. I think it just looks a little cleaner and it reduces the number of lines of code. But since this is a beginner tutorial, I'm going to put it like here just because it's what other people do, and do whatever you feel comfortable with. But I always make sure to indent things that are within these curly brackets. So this is going to check how far away the mouse is. And if our mouse is hovering over the block, it will destroy it, meaning it will make that block disappear. It'll make it so it no longer exists. So we've added code to the game. We can run it to see if it works. Mouse over. Oh, pop. Nope, disappear, disappear, disappear. It works. So you know what an if conditional is. You know basically what a function is. A function is a specific instructions that is built into Gamemaker that you can call upon, and there's hundreds upon hundreds and hundreds of different functions. And we're going to learn just a few of those in this tutorial series, some very common ones that are very useful. Distance to point is a very useful one to remember. Mouse X and mouse Y is built-in variables, very useful to remember for future games. Instance destroy as a function, very useful, used all the time in Gamemaker. Make sure that you don't put anything within these parentheses, even though you can write O block here to make it so it destroys every instance of O block in the room, but we don't want to do that. We just want it to destroy this one instance of the block. So we're going to not do that. We run the game. All right, so now that we know that it works, let's add a game over. So if so the game restarts if one of those blocks reaches the top of the game screen. So I'm going to go down a few lines, comment, restart game if block floats too high, and our conditional statement if y is less than -40. Now, remember, in Gamemaker, open this up, in Gamemaker, y starts its count, the vertical position starts its count from the top. And so up top, this top line is 0, and above that top line is negative. So this is negative, like -20, -40, -60, etc. So what we're saying is, hey, if this block gets not only to 0, this is the 0 position because this is the middle of the block, it gets to -20, -40. If it's like completely out of the game screen, -40, we want you to do something. So down, open curly bracket, down, open curly bracket, close curly bracket. Another function, it's important to remember, game_restart, open and close parentheses, semicolon. This is a function that restarts the game. Let's test it. So we're going to wait until one of these blocks reaches top of the screen. Oh, and it restarted our game. And I'll just keep looping like that. Unless I destroy all the blocks, then it won't restart our game anymore. You could also use a function called room restart, which just restarts the one room. In fact, let's run the game so you can see how that looks. It will look exactly the same. We're going to watch a block go out of the screen. And it's like restarting the game because we only have the one room. So room restart and game restart are functionally the same. For now, we're going to just call it game restart. Let's see, anything else in my notes? Yeah, we've run the game. All right, so at this point, you've actually learned a lot about Gamemaker. So let's take a moment to make sure that we're all up to speed before we keep working. You've learned about the room. You've learned about the workspace view. You've learned about the asset library, sprites, objects, instances of objects, rooms, the room editor, room properties, room width and height, room layers, room background, the room background layer color. You've learned about GML code, create events, step events. Learned about comments, which are these 2 / green things that comment on our code, variables, object variables, built-in variables. So these are object variables, by the way. Boop, boop, boop. And built-in variables, which are things like this bright green mouse X. You've learned about speed, direction, X, Y. You've learned about if-then conditional statements. You've learned different functions such as game restart, room restart, distance to point, and instance destroy. You've learned about mouse X and mouse Y. You've learned about the use of the semicolon. You've learned about steps or game frames. You've also learned about different operators such as plus equals and minus equals and like multiply equals. All right, next, let's make it so the blocks keep appearing. So it's more of like a game and we can hover our mouse over them to make them disappear and then more blocks will spawn in. Let's create a new object. So I'm going to exit out of the game editor so it gets rid of this little section of the screen over here. Exit that so I just have the beautiful workspace view. And I'm going to actually close out of O block and I'm going to create a new object. I'm going to right click on objects, click create, and find object, click that. And I'm going to rename this O_control. Now, this is a control object. It just sort of manages the game for us. Excuse me. And so we don't need to see it. So we don't need to give it a sprite. It can just be invisible. Now, an object won't run its code. It won't do its thing unless it's in the room. So the very first thing we're going to do after creating O_control is we're going to open the room editor, make sure the instances layer is highlighted. We're going to click O_control and then click and hold it and bring it into the room. And you'll see a little question mark symbol. That just means it doesn't have a sprite. When we run the game, we actually won't see that anymore because it doesn't have a sprite. It's invisible. And now we can do things here with code to control the game. A somewhat functional event, at least, I mean, I don't use them really in serious projects, but it's great for just quick prototyping like this. You're going to hover over alarm and click alarm 0. An alarm is something that runs exactly one time, like a create event, but only does it after an amount of time has passed. That's an alarm. So an amount of time has passed, the alarm rings, this thing happens, except there's no sound. There's actually no ringing. So alarm 0 is something that can happen after a period of time. So when alarm 0 gets to 0, when it counts down to 0, it will run this code. So we're going to set how long that how long it'll take before an alarm gets to 0. But for now, let's just add a line of code here. Another function called instance underscore create underscore layer. This is a very useful function to learn. You'll use it in all of your game projects, where it creates a new instance of an object in your game. Open parentheses, and let's put in some arguments into this function. Arguments is information that we feed into a function. So you can see down here what arguments are needed to make this function operate. So that's just a good little cheat code here. And you can also hover over this, and with your mouse scroll wheel, you can click there and open up the help manual. Now you might need to download the help manual, but it'll teach you how to use this function if you hover over it and click with your mouse wheel. We won't do that right now. We'll do it later. First, we need to tell the function where in the room to create this new instance of an object. And instead of putting in like a number, like we want to create it at 20 pixels by 150 pixels, we're going to use another function, which is random underscore range, open parentheses 40, comma 560, close parentheses. This is a function that gets a random number. It's in fact a random integer number. That's what the I stands for, integer. Integer means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever. A real number is like 5.1 or 10.73. This is an integer number, it's just a whole number. And it's going to get us a random number between 40 and 560. Now remember, our room width is 600 pixels, so it's going to find a number that is in between 0 and 600. In fact, it gives us a little bit of a cushion between the left side. It gives us 40 pixels from the left and 40 pixels from the right. And this is going to be the horizontal or X position of where it's going to create a new block, comma. And we're always going to want these blocks to appear below our game screen and then float up. So let's give it a number below the bottom of the screen. Now the screen is 600 pixels tall. These are 40 pixel tall blocks. We want to make sure it's nice and low underneath. So let's, if we just put 600, we would see the top 20 pixels of the block because we put the sprite's origin at the middle. So let's give it a Y position of 640, which is underneath the game screen, comma, which layer it needs to be created in. Now in our room, we have only one instance layer. We can create new instance layers right here, but we only have the one, and this layer is called instances. We could call it something else, and we will later in this tutorial series. But for now, let's just use instances. That's the layer we want Gamemaker to create this instance of an object, quotes, end quotes, comma, and which object to create an instance of, which is O underscore block. Close parentheses and semicolon. And this is kind of a long function, but this will create an instance of O block in the instances layer at the X position generated from a random number and the Y position of 640. Very useful functions here, these two different functions. And now this is not going to run because we have not set our alarm to run yet. So let's go to add event. Close the game room. Add event, step. And here under step, let's create a little piece of code that will not only set our alarm, but will continue to reset the alarm every single time it runs. So we'll call this make a new block alarm if alarm square bracket 0 square bracket. So this is where we can set the alarm. This is alarm 0 over here. So we're going to make sure this is alarm 0. We can also make this like alarm 1 or 2 or 3. This is alarm 0. We're going to set if alarm 0 double equal sign -1. Now, double equal sign is a way to check if something equals something else. We don't use a single equal sign if we're checking. We only use a single equal sign if we're assigning a new value. If we're saying, hey, speed now needs to equal 5, we use a single equal sign. But if it's a condition, if we're checking to see if something equals something else, we use a different symbol, which is the double equal sign. Enter down, open curly bracket, close curly bracket, indent in. If alarm 0 equals -1. Now, -1 just means, is the alarm off? If the alarm is off, do this thing. Okay. Alarm 0 equals, that single equals, because we're assigning new value, 20. Semicolon. So an alarm will count down every frame of the game. So if you set it to 60, that will make this alarm go off in 1 second, because these steps run at 60 steps per second. So 20 is 1/3 of a second. We're setting it to 20 so we can test it quickly, so we don't have to wait a long time to get to a block. And after an alarm runs, and after an alarm sounds and runs its code, it turns itself off. So this will see that it's turned itself off, and it will reset the alarm. It'll tick down, run the code, turn itself off. The game will see that it's turned itself off and reset, and it'll just keep cycling over and over and over. Let's run the game. Control, and also make sure, just really important, make sure that your control object is actually in your game under the instances layer, because this is all in the control object. Let's run it, see if it works. Oh, yep, it's creating new blocks now. And in fact, since it's creating new blocks, they're so fast. We can actually go to our game under instances. I'm going to hold shift so I can click and hold, highlight all these, and we can delete them now, because our game under this control object will now create new blocks for us. So we want this game to get incrementally more difficult as time passes. We want to make the blocks start moving faster and faster and faster. And for that, I'm going to teach you about global variables. First, let's create a new room that is going to run before our game room, because in that room is where we're going to declare our global variables. Global just means variables that can be used anywhere in the game by any object in any line of code. It's always accessible to everything in Gamemaker. Now, to use a global variable, we just need to make sure that global variable is declared before anything else happens in the game, which is why one system of doing that is to make a room. So I'm going to right-click Rooms, click Create, Room, and I'm going to call this room r_splash. And I'm going to set the width over here to 600, height to 600 under room properties. And I'm going to just leave it with a black background. Or actually, instead of r_splash, let's call it r_title. So I'm going to right-click that, go to rename r_title. There we go. Now, right now, even though we've created this new room, we need to tell the game to run this room r_title before our game. You see the little home symbol that's next to our game? That's telling the game that that's the home room. That's the first game it's going to load up, or the first room it's going to load up. So all we have to do is click on that little house symbol. And over here, that gives us a little window called Room Order. And we can click and hold our title and just drag it up. So our title is above our game, and now our title has the little home symbol. And I can close that window. And here you can see our title now has that home symbol. So our title room will now open before anything else. We made this 600 by 600 pixels wide and high because the first room that loads up dictates the width and height of your game window. For now, it's more complicated than that, but for now I'll just leave the explanation at that. And we are going to go to creation code. So under properties, where you set the width and height of our title, there's a little button called creation code. Click creation code. It'll give us another little window up here in the room editor. And here is a code that can run when the room is created. And here we're going to declare some global variables. We're going to make these global variables exist, and then we're going to tell the game to automatically transport us to the game room. Let's see. For now, let's set the global variable to be called global.blockSpeed. What should the block speed be set to? Let's see, do I have notes over? Excuse me, there we go. Oh, okay. Global.blockSpeed equals 2, semicolon. In fact, I'm going to add a little comment here. Declare global variables. A global variable, you make it just by writing the word global and then a period, and then you write the name of your global variable, and then you can set it to what you want it to equal. And then another comment, go to r_game, room underscore go to, one word, open parentheses, r_game, close parentheses, semicolon, room go to, fantastic function. You're going to use it in all of your games. It just says, hey, if we're in whatever room we're in, go open up this other room. And so the game's going to open up our game immediately. Global.blockSpeed, you notice has a little caution sign because we've only used it once. So we're just going to close that. And if you're wondering where your room is, you can just go over here to center fit, click that, and it'll bring us back to our title. We're going to close the R title room editor screen, and we're going to open oblock. And we're going to go where it says y minus equals spd, and we're going to change this to a global variable, global.blockSpeed, which still equals 2 at this point. And we're going to just run the game because we've changed some things. We just want to make sure everything is working. It's running 2 pixels every second, so that's good. It's moving 2 pixels every second, rather. And now we can close this, open ocontrol, and we can click Add Event, and we're going to create another alarm. Instead of alarm 0, we're going to select alarm 1. And in alarm 1, we're going to add a line of code to increase the speed of those blocks. We'll write global.blockSpeed plus equals 0.25, semicolon. So every time this alarm runs this line of code, it will increase this variable by 0.25. It'll make the speed of those blocks just a little bit faster. But we need to set this alarm to make sure it runs. So go over to the step event of ocontrol, add a comment here, say increase the block speed, and add the condition statement if alarm 1 double equals -1, meaning if alarm 1 is off, open curly bracket, close curly bracket, indent, alarm 1 equals 60. We want the speed of those blocks to just increase slightly every second. Now remember, this is the step event, and the game runs at 60 steps per second, and alarms also tick down every frame of the game, every step of the game. And so when we put in 60, it means for 1 second. You can make it longer. If it was 120, it'd be 2 seconds. If it was 150, it'd be, 2.5 seconds. So semicolon there. And now we can run the game to see if those blocks get faster, a little bit faster every second. So, oh, they're going faster. They're going faster. They're going faster. Faster, I can't keep up. I'm trying to make sure they don't get to the top. Oh, our game restarts and they're slow again. And we want to make sure that the game starts easy, but then gets a little bit more difficult. I set these speeds to be kind of fast, and that it should change pretty fast, just so we can see it changing. We don't want to change that fast. So you can go ahead and change these alarm times until it feels right. I think making a new block, instead of every 20 frames, maybe every 40 frames, which is 2/3 of a second, instead of 1/3 of a second. And then the block speed should be changed maybe like every 3 seconds. Run the game, see if it works. So it's creating blocks a little slower now. And those blocks are moving a little slower. meaning they're only increasing in speed every 3 seconds. So now, oh, it's gotten a little faster. And remember, it's only increasing the block speed by 1/4 of a pixel every 3 seconds. But it's getting faster now, and it's going to get to a point where I can't keep up with my mouse. Let's see how good I am at my own game. Oh, oh, they're getting faster. Getting faster. Oh, I can do it. So this is more like an actual experience now instead of just something that ends immediately. Oh, okay. Ooh. Mouse over, mouse over, mouse over, mouse over. They're getting faster. Anyway, you get the point. It's going to get to a point. It's going to keep getting faster and faster until I get a game over. So let's just pretend that happens and it restarts the game. All right, now you've learned about alarm events. You've learned about the 2 different functions, instant create layer, very useful function, and iRandomRange, another very useful function. You've learned about room_go_to, which moves where you are in the game to different rooms. You've learned about global variables. You've learned about the room order window, which changes which room appears first. You've learned about room creation code, that you can run code when a room gets created or opens in the game. You've learned about declaring variables. You've learned about frames per second. You've learned about the difference between a double equal sign, which checks the value of something, versus a single equal sign, which assigns a new value. And now let's add some graphics, because these graphics look boring and they're very prototype-ish. And it's great when you're sort of prototyping a game fast just to use colored blocks. But thankfully, I have made us some graphics for our game. So let's make things look awesome. If you have images that you want to use, go ahead and just use your own. You can use ones that I create. You can find a folder with the graphics that I've made, depending on where you're watching this, maybe in the description of this video or someplace else. I use this video for classes, for instance, so my students will be able to know where that folder is. So look for that link to that online folder, and you should be able to find it in the video description or somewhere else. You can use your own images, but one piece of advice, just a piece of game design advice, that like poor art, like bad art, well implemented, like implemented really well with an art style that fits, even if all the art is kind of bad, but they all kind of fit together, that works better than professional art that you find online where none of the art assets really match or work together. So amateur art done well will always look better than professional art poorly implemented. Piece of advice: you can look at the games on my website, skylorel.net, to see what I mean, because I think my art is crap, but it's well implemented, and so everything fits together. So I'll give you the stuff that I made. So to import images to Gamemaker to your sprites, you need to download the images to your computer, which I have not yet done, so I should do that. Or maybe I have. Hold on. Let me make sure that I've downloaded the images. I have not. Oh, okay. Let me go download those images really quick. It's in a Google Drive folder. I have a folder with the game's graphics and sounds and everything downloaded onto my desktop. You can do the same thing even in real time, evidently, because I didn't download that ahead of time. So now open your s_block, which is your sprite for your block, and we're going to change that. Click import. And under desktop, I have this folder called first game files, and you are going to just open just this one block image, block01.png, and hit open. Importing files to a sprite is not an undoable action. Do you want to continue? Yes. So this gets us this thing right here. Now you're going to import other things, and we're going to animate this in a second, but I just want to make it the most basic thing right now. Now I'm making sure that the origin is still middle center. Everything should work. Now I'm going to hit run. I'm going to run the game to make sure that they appear. Yep, those are my new blocks. Very good. We're also going to add a background image, so we're going to create a new sprite. Call it s_background. We're going to click import and open the background image. Here's our background. And set the origin to middle center again. Close that. Open our game room. Click the background layer. Now we're going to change it so we no longer need this background color. Instead, above the background color bar, you see a button called No Sprite. We're going to click that, click Sprites, and click Select Background. We get our cool looking cyberpunk background. We're going to click a little box called Vertical Tile, which means the background will just stack itself vertically above and below automatically in Gamemaker, because we want to do that because we're going to make the background move. We're going to change the vertical speed to, let's see, what did I have it set? 0.5, I believe. Change the vertical speed to 0.5, which means a half a pixel every second. Run the game. We now have a background that moves downwards a half a pixel every second. And I purposely designed this background image so that it stacks on itself nicely. So there's no like obvious break in where the background begins and ends. And you can also click horizontal tile if you want and add a horizontal speed if you'd like. Mess around with that, see what you think. Now, sprites can have a series of images which animates them. So we're going to do that with our block sprite. So open your block sprite, click import again, and this time select all of these at the same time. Now you can do that different ways. One thing I like to do is I like to hold the control button or the command button on a Mac and then click each file to make sure they're all highlighted and then click open. Yes. And now it opens all of these images in a single sprite. We're going to change the animation speed up here, FPS 30. We're going to change that to 10 frames per second. And you can hit this little play button to see what it looks like. So I made it so it looked like just scrambled little information like a virus. Hit play, see what the game looks like. So now these blocks are like scrambled little staticky random information blocks. They are now animated. That's important because when you create a game with, say, like a character that's running, you want to be able to import all the images, all the different frames of that character running, and animate it appropriately. So now we need to add some instructions to the game to let the player know how to play it. So we need to introduce you to fonts and draw events. We're going to do this with text. So let's create a new font. Close these. A font is just a typeface that Gamemaker can access that's built right into the game. We're going to right-click font, create, and we're going to select font, and we're going to name it F_instruct, F for font _instruct. And under select font, choose a font that you like for this game, because it's kind of like computer cyberpunk themed. If you were using a Mac, I would recommend Menlo, M-E-N-L-O. If you're using a Windows computer, I recommend Consolas. There we are. Gamemaker can only access fonts or typefaces that are installed directly on your computer, and you can install other typefaces. I like the website dafont.com, which is dafont.com, and you can download and install new fonts on your computer. Fonts are not standardized across computers. Different computers have different fonts. It's just something important to remember, and that's why Gamemaker has a font asset, because that way, no matter where you open and work on your project, as long as the font is in your project assets, it will carry that font wherever you go. So we have Consolas. We're going to change the size to like 14. I'm going to change the style from regular to bold. And I'm going to close that. We now have a font we can call on in Gamemaker. I'm going to create a new object now. Right-click object, create object, and call this O_instruct. This is our instruction object or our tutorial object. Under O_instruct, I'm going to add an event, a create event. And actually, no, I need a draw event first. Please forgive me. I'm going to add event, a new event called draw. Now, there's a bunch of different types of draw events. We're just going to do the plain Jane draw event. And we're going to use this to create some graphics. Now, draw events draw colors, lines, and shapes in your game for you. It can be very useful in some instances. In other instances, it's not as useful. In this case, it is useful. So let's add a comment that says set the font, color, and alignment. So let's do that here. We're going to be writing some text, and so we want to tell the game which font to use, which color to use for our text, and whether to center it, put it left aligned, right aligned, top or bottom. It's called alignment. So let's write a bunch of different functions, and they're pretty self-explanatory. And again, you can always click on any of these functions with your mouse wheel and make the help manual pop up, and it will describe these functions. Here we go. Draw, set, font, parentheses, F underscore instruct, close parentheses, semicolon, draw, set, color, C underscore aqua. Aqua is a built-in color in Gamemaker. There's a bunch of different built-in colors, as you can see. Gamemaker, you can create your own colors using like hex code or RGB values. Those are different functions that we don't need to worry about right now because this is a beginner tutorial. So we're just going to choose C underscore aqua. Draw, set, let's see, it's called H align, which is horizontal alignment. FA center, which centers it. Draw, set, V align, FA middle, semicolon. Now, it's giving me a little caution. It disappeared. Good. Just making sure. Always pay attention to those red cautions because it means something is mistyped. So now I will comment draw text. Draw underscore text, open parentheses, X, Y, meaning you're going to write this text exactly wherever I place O instruct, this object, in the room. If I put like 10 and, I don't know, 300, it would put it 10 pixels from the left of the screen and 300 pixels from the top. But we just want this text to appear wherever the instruction object is placed. So X and Y. And then the text we want it to write is first blocks by hovering your mouse over them, period, end quotes. Draw some more text. X. Now we want this next line to be lower than this line, so it's going to be the same horizontal position, but the Y position will be Y minus, or sorry, Y plus 40, because we want it below that line. And remember, things go from top to bottom in Gamemaker. Next line of instructions: don't let them leave the screen! Exclamation point. Close quotes, parentheses, semicolon. I'm gonna wait for this to disappear. Yep, everything is written correctly. All right, let's go over these functions to make sure you understand them. Draw set font sets the font. We only have one font loaded into Gamemaker, so that's the only one we could put. Draw set color, told you about colors already. Draw set H align, that's horizontal alignment. You can put FA center, FA left, or FA right. Draw set V align, which is FA middle, FA top, or FA bottom. And that just aligns the text from wherever we put our instruction object and wherever we have told the game to draw our text. It tells it where to put that text in relationship to its location. Draw text draws text, and we can just put the text we want to draw using this font and color and everything, and where we want that to happen. We just want that to happen wherever the instruction object is placed in the room. These bright words in yellow, this means it is a string or actual text. So you want to make sure that all of your text appears as yellow and that these quote marks are correctly implemented, which tells the game that this is a string. A string is a type of variable in Gamemaker. In fact, you can assign strings to names. You can call this like instructions. Instructions is the variable, and you can make it equal, open quote mark. Here are the instructions. Close quote mark, semicolon. You can declare variables and give them strings as their value, which we might use. I could call this instruction 1 and call this instruction 2, and then in the create event, I could instruction 1, give the instructions. For now, it's simple enough that we just do this. So now in our create event, if you haven't created a create event, go ahead and do that. And we're going to tell the game where to put this instruction object in the room. We're going to assign its X position to be room underscore width divided by 2. Room width, built-in variable. It checks how wide the room is and gives you that number, and then we divide that by 2 to mean the middle of the room horizontally. And then Y, we'll just say 70, which is 70 pixels down from the top. And instruct, remember, still isn't in the room. Oh, by the way, room width, as you can guess, there's also a built-in variable called room height that you can call upon anywhere in your game. We still need to get the instruction object in the room, or none of this will work. We've created all this code, but it's not in the room yet. So let's open our game room. Under instances, we will move our instruction object into it. It doesn't matter where, because we have added code to tell it where to place this object correctly in the room. And let's run the game, and we should see some text. Now it's kind of tiny here, but in your own game, if you're following this tutorial, you should be able to see it. We have some text there. It's not very visible. We need to add a black background to the text so we can read it a little bit better. And we also need to make those instructions disappear after a little while. But everything is working. We want these instructions to fade out though. So back to instruct. In the create event, let's add some code. Comment how transparent the text. 1 is fully visible, 0 is invisible. Then the code A equals 1. So we're declaring a variable. This will be a real number variable, and it is 1. You can also call it 1.01 to make sure it's a real number. But Gamemaker is pretty good at figuring that out itself. And then another comment, a Boolean to tell the game to turn the instructions off when false. Make that a little wider so you can see my comment. Show text is the variable, and this is a Boolean variable. Boolean means it's like a light switch. It's either on or it's off. It is true or it is false. It is 1 or it is 0. So this Boolean we're calling show text, and we're starting it as true, meaning we want to show the instructions. It's set to true, and we're going to write some code so that when show text gets switched to false, it will start the process to make those instructions fade out and delete themselves. In the step event, we're going to add event step comment fade out instructions when show text is false. If, now, this is a conditional. You can write this a bunch of different ways. You can write if show text equals false. That's one way of writing it. Do that if that's what you're most comfortable with. Another way to do that is you can just write show text, which means, hey, if this is true, and if you want to check to see if it's false, you add a bang or an exclamation point to the beginning of it. Anytime an exclamation point appears, oftentimes in code, it means the word not. So you can write something like, if 1 does not equal 2. Now, this would return true because 1 indeed does not equal 2. So it would run the code within its curly brackets. Here we're checking, hey, if show text is false, by adding that bang before it, we're asking Gamemaker if this is false. But again, if that's all too confusing for you, please just feel free to just write show text equals false. If it makes more sense to you, just do that. It's checking if show text is switched to false. Now, if you remember, we've set it to true. So by writing if show text equals false, it's not going to run this code immediately. It'll only run this code after it is switched to false. But let's set the instructions first, and then we'll set an alarm to turn that show text Boolean to false. So if show text is false, indent, and we're going to write another condition statement. You can couch these condition statements within themselves. If a is greater than 0, which it is, if you remember our create event, we set a to 1. If a is greater than 0, it is. Do the following things. A minus equals 0.01. If it is greater than 0, start subtracting 0.1 from itself every frame of the game. Now I'm going to introduce you to another cool part of coding, which is else. Else, when added after an if condition statement says, hey, if this is true, do this. If this is not true, do this. If this, then that, else do this. So it's a cool way of saying, hey, do this thing if it is true, do this thing if it is false, or do this thing if it is false, but do this thing if it is true. So else instance underscore destroy. So what this does is if it checks if show text has been switched to false. If it has been switched to false, it will check to see if A is greater than 0. If it is, which it is, we've declared it to equal 1. Start subtracting 0.01 from it every frame of the game. When you finally get to 0, because else essentially means A is less than or equal to 0. That's what this else is saying. Hey, if it's greater than 0, do this, but if it is less than or equal to 0, do this. That's what this else means. Destroy it. Just if you can no longer see it, because this is going to mean in a bit, it's going to mean how transparent it is. If it's completely invisible, destroy it. We don't need it in the room anymore, so get rid of it. And next, in our draw event, we're going to make this A mean something. And here, right before you draw your text, we're going to add a line of code called draw set alpha. Alpha in images means how visible, transparent, or not transparent something is. If it is 1, it means it is fully visible. If it's 0, it means invisible. If it's 0.5, it means it is 50% transparent. Hope you get it. We're going to set draw set alpha A. That variable that we created, A for alpha. So we've set it to equal 1, so the instructions will be fully visible at the beginning. After our text, though, we want to write draw set alpha 1, because these draw events are a little tricky. If you change the alpha value in one draw event, it affects all the draw events of all the other objects. And when we don't want to make it so when this starts fading out, when this A value starts decreasing and stops being 1, we don't want to make it so all the other things in our game disappear. It's a little quirk of Gamemaker. So we do at the end write draw set alpha 1 at the end to make sure that everything drawn after this text is still completely visible. A little quirk of the game, so just forget about it. Just know that if you're ever manipulating the alpha value in a draw event, afterwards, set it back to 1. So everything is set except we have no line of code telling us to change show text to false yet. So for that, we will add an alarm. In this alarm event, we'll just write show text equals false. Our alarm isn't set to run yet, so we'll go to create event, and we'll set the alarm to a number. Let's add a comment, turn show text to false after a few seconds. Alarm 0 equals 300. 300, I believe, is 6 times 5. That's 5 seconds, right? 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that's 5 seconds. So this will begin the fade out process after 5 seconds, because here in the create event, it's going to set the alarm. The alarm is going to run, it's going to turn off, and the alarm is not going to run anymore because we've just done it in the create event. It's just going to set up that one time. It'll tick down 1 frame per second. It will set this Boolean to false. When it's set to false, this code will start to run, which decreases the A value, the A variable. The A variable is set to this draw set alpha, which will make this less and less visible. And then when it reaches 0, it will destroy itself. Now, I think that is everything. Let's run the game and see if it works. We have our instructions here. After 5 seconds, it should fade out. Oh, faded out, disappeared. It's gone. It worked. Now you can change this value right here to make it fade out more slowly. So you could say 0.05, which makes it fade out even more slowly. You can make it fade out faster, 0.1. I messed around with it. I like this speed. We need to add some visual panache to it. but let's learn how to do that. If you don't know how to do something in Gamemaker, I can't stress enough the value of the help manual as a way of searching for new functions that you want to exist, but you feel like they could exist, but you don't know if they do. You can search for them. For instance, we want to draw a black box behind the text so that we can see our text better, because right now we can't see the text very well. It's aqua colored, like cyan colored text over a black and cyan colored background. That's not very visible. So we want a black background so the instructions pop out more. And certainly the Gamemaker has a way to draw that black box. Well, it does. We also want a way to make the text kind of vibrate a little bit, like pulse a little bit. So for that, let's open the help manual. You can do that by just clicking help, open manual. Now I need to download it. Actually, I don't. It just opened the browser. So it could open a browser. Here under search, I'm going to search for scale draw text. And here it shows me a bunch of different things, but one thing it shows me is a function called draw text transformed. Oh, let's click that, see what that is. Oh, it's a draw text function that has a bunch of extra arguments that let us control the text in more ways than just telling it what text to draw and where to draw it. It tells us, it gives us ways to manipulate its scale, or how big it is in terms of width, how big it is in terms of height, and those can be variables that can change in the game, and also its angle. We can make things turn around or be at a slight angle. So draw text transformed, and I'm literally going to just highlight draw text transformed and copy it, and I'm going to use it over here instead. Instead of draw text, I'm going to change this to draw text transformed, draw text transformed. Now, this requires some extra arguments. We do not have all the information for Gamemaker to run this function properly. You can see down here it requires a bunch of different arguments, the first of which is location, which we have, the string, which we have here, very good. But then after that, we need to add X scale and Y scale and angle. For here, we're just going to write comma and write the word scale, because this is going to be a variable we're going to manipulate in the game. Comma, and we want the Y scale or the vertical scale to be the same. I'll write scale the exact same, comma, and then the angle. We don't want to change the angle at all. We're just going to write 0. You could write 90 or 180, just like with the direction variable, change which way it is angled. We just want it the same angle as it has been before, so we're going to write 0. Same down here. Comma, scale, comma, scale, comma, 0. Now, we're calling on a variable that we haven't created yet. That's why it's giving us these little cautions. So let's create that variable. Let's declare that variable in the create event. I'm going to add another comment and write how big the text should be. 1 is its normal size. Scale equals 1. When grow is true, make the text grow. When false, it will shrink. Grow equals true. So we've created a new real number variable and a new Boolean variable set to true, scale and grow. So scale is now set to 1. So its scale will just be the same as it has been in the past. So when we run the game, everything is exactly the same. Nothing's changed. It's just set to the same size as before. But we're going to add some code in the step event that's going to make the text pulse or grow and shrink a little bit. So comment pulse text. If grow is true, grow equals true, you can write, or I just write if grow. That's a way of asking if a Boolean is true. Remember, if I want to ask if the Boolean is false, I add a bang or an exclamation point before the Boolean. If grow, meaning if grow is true, do the following. Else, meaning if grow is false, do this. So I have an if and an else conditional statement, an indent here. So if grow is true, add another condition statement. If scale is less than 1.08. Now, I'm going to teach you about inline condition statements. You don't always have to hit return and add a curly bracket. If it's short enough, you can just write if, oh, close that. If this, then right afterwards, you can just start writing with or without curly brackets. You can write the code you want to have run. Scale plus equals 0.002, really small increment, semicolon, else grow equals false, semicolon. This is an inline condition statement with no curly brackets. This works just fine. In the else statement, write if scale is greater than 0.9, scale minus equals 0.002, semicolon, else grow equals true. So what this does is that it switches between these two states. So it is growing, then it's shrinking, then it's growing, then it's shrinking. So first, if grow is true, which I believe we set it to true at the beginning, but even if we set it to false, it would run this. But we set it to true. So first, it is true, so it'll say, hey, grow is true, so we need to run this code. Is scale less than 1.08? It is. We set scale to 1, so it is less than 1.08. So if it is, increase scale by 0.002 every frame of the game. Keep having that happen until this happens, until it gets to 1.08. When it does, change grow to false. Oh, grow is no longer true. We have to start running this code over here. If scale is greater than 0.9, which it is, it's 1.08 right now. If it's greater than 0.9, start reducing scale by 0.002 every frame of the game. When it gets to 0.9, which is the else, change grow to true. Oh, grow is true. Now it starts running this line of code. So it switches back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So let's see if it works. Oh, and now we have pulsing instructions. Just a little bit of visual panache, a little bit of polish, makes it look a little better. Still not very visible. We need to add a black background to the text. So let's go to the draw event. And one important thing to learn about draw events is that anything drawn before something is going to be underneath whatever is drawn after. So since we want our black box to be underneath the text, we need that to happen before the text gets drawn. So comment black background to text, draw set. Oh, I forget, I can't be changing the color here. We want these colors to be associated with the text, so we don't want to change colors of the black box and also make the text black. So here we go. At the very top of the draw event, black background to text, because I'm going to change the color. Draw set color, see black. Draw rect. You could draw a rectangle in this game, which is just a square rectangle. We're going to draw a rectangle with rounded corners, which is round rect. And we're going to make it, we're going to add some extra things to extra instructions, which we can do with the function draw round rect underscore ext, which means extended. There's draw rectangle, draw round rectangle, and draw round rectangle extended. Bunch of different functions for different purposes. And here, you can see down here all the arguments that we need. You can also click with your mouse wheel to read about all the arguments we need to add to this function. But the first thing we need to instruct it is the location in the room for its top left corner, which will be x10, y40. That's the top left corner of the rectangle. And now we need the location of its bottom right corner, which will be 590 and 140. I've just messed around with this. I see that these work with this game. Comma, and now we need the radius of the rounded corners, which I found to be good at like 30 for the X radius. For the Y radius for the rounded corners, I've also found 30 to be a good number. I've just messed around, honestly, just messed around with these numbers till it looked right. And then outline, we can just make this we can just make this round rectangle just an outline, or we can make it a filled in shape. We want it to be a filled in shape, so we can write false here, or we can write 0. I'm just going to write 0. Now we're going to draw a different color, draw set color C underscore aqua. Draw round rect underscore ext. And we're going to do the exact same values because we want the exact same shape of rectangle, but we want this to be an outline around the black box. So again, 10, 40, 590, 140, 30, 30, except this we're going to put to true or 1. They're both the same. I'm going to put 1 for consistency, semicolon, and all the cautions should disappear. Yes, now we've created 2 rectangles, one black, and on top of that, a line rectangle with rounded corners that is aqua colored. And then on top of that, we have the instructions. And we can run the game and see if it works. There we go. Now you see that our text disappeared. It sort of faded out before it deleted everything. So we want to make sure that our draw set alpha, let's move that to the very, very top. So this is affecting how transparent everything is. So when the text starts fading out, the rectangles will also start fading out. Beautiful. So you've learned a lot about these draw events. You've learned about how to import sprite images. You've learned about adding background image to a room, about the vertical tiling of a room's background, horizontal tiling of a room's background, the vertical speed and horizontal speed of a room's background, the frames per second animation speed for a sprite. You've learned about fonts. And as an asset, you've learned about draw events, draw set font as a function, draw set color, draw set h-align, draw set v-align, draw text, strings, string variables, room width, room height. You've learned about booleans, else statements. You learned about alpha values, draw set alpha. You've learned how to open the game's manual to look for other functions. You've learned about draw text transformed, inline if statements, draw rectangle, and draw round rectangle extended. That's a lot. Whew. So this is where we're at in our game. This is step 1. We have instructions, we have some graphics, we have some basic mechanics. Now, we're far from done with this game. We have a lot more to work on. But for now, that gives you a solid foundation. That's step 1. Thank you so much for sticking with this very long video. I will see you in step 2.